Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is directed by J.A. Bayona and stars Chris Pratt, Bryce Dallas Howard, and Jeff Goldblum. When it comes to the first Jurassic World movie, I will say that I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. But it's definitely not a perfect movie by any means. I definitely think the best aspect of that entire film is probably Michael Giacchino's score and some specific scenes that really stood out to me. Specifically one involving pterodactyls that I thought was really amazing. Apart from that, the rest of that movie was a little bit forgettable and a little bit generic, even though for the most part it is still a pretty enjoyable and entertaining summer blockbuster movie that happens to have some key standout scenes. Which is why I wasn't all that excited for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I was just expecting more of the same, but just packaged a little bit differently. But the one thing that did draw my attention to this film specifically was its director of J.A. Bayona. And if you don't know, if that name doesn't ring a bell immediately, he's directed films in the past such as The Orphanage, The Impossible, and A Monster Calls. Now, I haven't seen the first and last one, but I have seen The Impossible, and I really liked that movie a lot. I think it delved into the drama and the emotion of those characters in that situation as good as it could have. And I personally think he does a really good job here with what he has, you know, at his disposal for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I think he does a really good job in terms of setting up really epic looking visuals, and from a visual standpoint, this movie is a massive improvement over the first one. Because the first one was very CGI heavy and didn't really have, you know, from a visual standpoint, it didn't really grab my attention. It just looked like another summer blockbuster. But there are some shots in this movie that are genuinely amazing. Which is a shame because everything else about this movie is kind of run-of-the-mill. And it's annoying because you can see Bayona is trying to do what he can in this limited space, but unfortunately the moments of greatness that you have in this movie and some of the incredible shots that he's able to compose in this film are unfortunately bogged down by a really predictable plot and some really cliched writing. But I must stress, the directing, visuals and cinematography of this movie is way better than it has any right to be. You can tell that Bayona was really, really trying to make this look way more interesting than the typical summer blockbuster usually does. And that heavily applies to the third act of the film, where his horror roots with his first movie, The Orphanage, are heavily applied. And the third act of the movie uses some really strong horror-esque imagery and feels like it's straight out of a horror film. Not in terms of like gore and that, but more in terms of like the use of silhouettes and shadows and the suspense and the tension of that third act. I was really impressed with some of the shots that he was able to use in that final act, and it was what I was kind of hoping more of the movie would be like. Because when I saw certain shots in the trailers, I was like, I wonder how that's going to apply to the film, obviously not knowing what the plot was. But after seeing the movie and loving that third act so much, I just wish that more of the movie had played out that way. Because, like, I will admit, I did have a fun time with this movie, but that third act just showed off so much potential in what could have been a really interesting and tense version of a Jurassic Park / Jurassic World movie. The best way I can describe it is that third act of that movie, with one scene in particular, perfectly recaptured the genuine terror that was felt in the raptors in the kitchen scene in the original Jurassic Park. That is how good some of the shot composition and execution of some of the scenes in that third act. It's on the same level as that really iconic scene from the first Jurassic Park. And if he just kind of kept up that aspect of it, then I think this would have been a really great movie. But unfortunately, like I mentioned, there's stuff holding it back, and it does feel like there is a great movie trying to get out of what unfortunately is an okay movie at best. All of the human characters in this movie are pretty uninteresting and bland, probably just as bland as they were in the first movie, but that being said, Bryce Dallas Howard's character and Chris Pratt's character do feel slightly better and more refined in this movie. They're still not great characters, and every time it cuts back to them, it is slightly boring, especially within the first half of the movie. But that being said, I do feel like their relationship between each other doesn't feel nearly as forced as it did in the first movie, and actually, feels somewhat believable. Apart from that, most of the other human characters in this movie are really forgettable. You've got Rafe Spall and Toby Jones playing these arsehole business people who are obviously the bad guys of the film, and they're as generic as you could possibly think a character like that would be. Jeff Goldblum's in the movie. Not for long though. He's literally in 2 scenes. 2 really brief scenes, and that's it. And I've seen him doing interviews and promoting this movie as if he's a huge part of it. He's literally in 2 very short scenes. Yeah. What is being promoted as a supporting role is literally just a cameo, really. Now, one aspect of the last movie that I absolutely loved was Michael Giacchino's score. I really liked how he grabbed motifs from the previous original Jurassic Park movies and worked it in with completely new ideas to make it sound like something kind of unique, even though it was reused slightly. And I really love that score. I think it's way better than it needs to be, especially for the film that it went with. And he did the score for this movie as well. And even though I still liked it, I do feel as if it reused a lot of things from that first movie's score, and I feel like he could have introduced a few newer things like he did with the Jurassic World score, because this does feel a little bit repetitive, and there were a few times where the score builds up and it's like, yeah, I have already kind of heard this before. Some of the new ideas he has introduced into the score this time are good, but are nowhere near as impressive as they were in the first movie. And I suppose this does also reflect the writing for this movie, because the plot is so predictable. Like, there are some moments especially that you could literally guess everything that was going to happen within certain scenes. And unfortunately, that does take away from the moment of certain scenes. That was quite annoying, because, and this is where I'm kind of at a contradiction with my point here. There are some scenes, specifically chase scenes and, stuff of, very suspenseful scenes that are really well directed, really well executed, but unfortunately all the suspense and tension as to whether the characters are going to survive is completely taken out of the moment when, 1, they are reused quite a few times in the movie, and 2, the way they're written, you obviously know the characters are going to survive, so it takes you out of the moment, despite the fact they are still really well filmed and executed. Do you get what I mean? It's a little bit of a contradiction. There are some moments in the film that are stupidly written and are as predictable as fuck, but that being said, they're so well directed that I kind of feel as if I want to forgive them, but unfortunately it happens so much in the film that it kind of becomes this balancing act of whether I can forgive that nitpick or not. And it's just kind of annoying. But with all that being said, if you enjoyed the first Jurassic World movie like I did, I think you will still find a lot to appreciate about this movie. I definitely think this is a better directed film than the first one, because from a visual standpoint, it does so much better than the first Jurassic World. And it's kind of that aspect alone that keeps me coming back to this movie more than I probably will with the first one. And even though I still think the first one is entertaining as a turn your brain off summer blockbuster film, I do feel like this one actually had a bit of time and effort put into its direction and cinematography, which is why I'm going to give Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom a 7.5 out of 10. Like I said, I really think Bayona tried with this movie. I'm not saying that Colin Trevorrow didn't try on the first film, but you can tell that there's a little bit more thought and care put behind some of the shots in this movie, especially within the third act. Whereas the first movie just kind of felt like your run-of-the-mill summer blockbuster. So guys, that was my review of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.